Hello. Yeah, we want to hello everybody. Welcome to Dead Talks. The first time we have multi-streamed, so we're just seeing if it's actually working. The one on Twitter, I was like, is it going to work on Twitter? Because a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, like the internet was saying you need to have the studio for it to work.
Let's see.
Oh, yeah, we are live.
Are you live on Twitter? That's cool.
No, we're live on YouTube. Let's look on Twitter.
There we are.
Yeah, we're live. Oh my
We're
God,
live.
this is crazy. Here we go. It's working. So, yeah, Dead Talks. Welcome everybody. It's been on Instagram for 2 years and we've had so much fun. It's the show that explores the global fight for peace by talking to modern day peacemakers. And so far, we've spoken to 84 peacemakers from around the world and just learned all about them and how they got into this insane global peace movement, and also about their passions, their interests, expertise, sometimes a campaign they're running or the organization that they work for. So not only have we and our community built a wealth of knowledge from literally talking to people that are working towards change, but we've also created an awesome network, which has just been so beautiful to lean upon and work with as we all work towards peace, a more peaceful world, whether that means dismantling the military industrial complex, whether that means trying to get rid of nuclear weapons, whether that means something more kind of grassroots. Like we're talking to someone in a couple of weeks that has an organization that literally trades blades for activities and skills. So yeah, it's really awesome to be now branching out and widening our reach and just exploring the new platforms and see how far we can take it, you know. And there's no better person to be doing this with than Dr. Kim Foale. Hello.
Hello.
Kim is not only the founder of Geeks for Social Change, but also on the Dead Council, which is an utter honor. For those that don't know, the council is basically a governance structure that we have. It's made up of modern day peacemakers that we're just in awe of, and they help kind of just advise us and shape our organization. Demilitarized education is working for a world where universities champion peace. So we're basically working with students to populate our University in Arms database and use this information to get universities to sign the Demilitarized Education Treaty, and begin, divesting, changing their policy so they're not involving themselves with the arms trade anymore, but instead helping build towards a secure and more peaceful world. So yeah, the council members, once a year we have actually twice a year, but it's once this year, we have a motions voting where they can actually contribute their ideas. And obviously it's just a fantastic way to kind of draw in so much knowledge from the social justice movement and network, and just make sure that we're actually thinking about everything, feasibility and ethics and covering all bases. So Kim, please can you introduce yourself? I'm really intrigued. Oh, and by the way, before we do this, we're talking about technology today, right? Kim runs Geeks for Social Change, and it's this amazing paradox of technology can change the world. It can do so much for us. It can save our lives and empower our lives. But then on the other hand, it can be used as a tool for darkness, and particularly in this case for war. And we were triggered to have this conversation because we have seen Girls Who Code, which is a non-profit for women, empowering women to join tech and giving them the skills and network they need to succeed in STEM industries. They have partnered with Raytheon. Now, this is just like a mad dystopian juxtaposition. I was just watching a video of like Raytheon and Girls Who Code being like, ooh, and they get these women from all around the world that are like, yeah, like minorities, like, oh my gosh, the people like most affected by war. And they get them talking about their goals and what they learned from it. And then you go to their YouTube channel, and the last video they've posted is about them, the missiles and that they've just created, and it's really dystopian and disturbing. So this is why Kim and I were like, let's talk about this. Kim obviously is very much in the technological space, so everyone watching, hello, thank you for being with us. Like, let's try and tap into that knowledge. If you've got any questions for Kim or any thoughts or feelings about this, like, in our opinion, dystopian partnership, please drop them in the comments and we'll keep up with them as we go along. So
that was a lot of intro. I like it. Got a lot to get into.
right, we were like, oh, gotta like start it off slow. I'm like, oh god, didn't think I could talk that much. Remember my friend Jed once was literally like 10 minutes late for the live stream because he couldn't get his mic to work, and he was like, I don't know how you managed to talk for that long, and I was like, me neither.
Practice. It's good.
Yeah. But anyway, who are you and how did you get into peacemaking and found Geeks for Social Change?
Yeah, hi. Yeah, I'm Kim. It's funny, this term peacemaker. It's like a lot of these ones you use. I guess I'm like a peacemaker by virtue of not tolerating bullshit. Which sounds like, it's kind of funny to say, right? It's like it feels like something that when I was a lot younger was kind of everywhere a bit more, and the C&D was a bigger thing, and people talked about the arms trade. And nowadays, I think there's just so much going on in the world. So it's funny, really, because we do a lot of stuff as a tech studio, but I'd say like the stuff we do looking at the influence of the arms trade is like the least popular. It kind of gets like tumbleweed on social media compared to some of the other stuff.
Really?
But anyway, you asked me who I was. I should start there. So I guess I've always sort of primarily sort of felt more like a sort of community organizer, community activist. I've done a bunch of mostly kind of feminist and queer and trans organizing in a sort of Leeds and Manchester. I'm from Nottingham, but spent most of my time doing stuff there. I fallen out with that countless times, as a lot of us have, due to all sorts of things that happened. I also I've always been a programmer coder, kind of making websites and doing making things for activist campaigns, small businesses, charities, that kind of thing. And I also did a PhD, because why not? When I got an offer for that, it was to do with listening. We don't really do much with that anymore. But so in about 2014, I'd graduated my PhD, and I've struggled with fibromyalgia my whole life too. So I was just like, I can't live these three lives of kind of doing activist stuff and making websites and doing this stuff. So I started Geeks for Social Change initially as a meetup group to try and start these kind of conversations around technology. And then it became a studio, and now it's kind of a sort of mix of a studio and a collective. We've got Discord, you can join us if you want. And basically, yeah, I think other countries, most notably like Germany and the Netherlands, have got more kind of like, there seems to be more crossover there in terms between like kind of activist and tech stuff. Like, especially in Germany, there's a lot of people very heavily invested in stuff like Chaos Computer Conference, and there's just a lot of people it's kind of just expected, I think, a bit more that like there's a general level of activist knowledge with technology and people talking about it. And I think even like 10 years ago, this was the case here in the UK, when there's a site called Indie Media, which has since died in this country, where I found out a lot about a lot of the stuff I went to when I first moved to Leeds, in terms of like where the squats were and where the parties were and where the activist stuff was happening and what the protests were about. That kind of fell apart. But also we had this social centers movement where there was, there's a load of funding that went into setting up a load of social centers up and down the country, or helping the ones that were already there. There was the Commonplace in Leeds, which later became Wharf Chambers and is still there. there was the basement in Manchester, which had a big fire and never reopened. There's a few others around the country, but these places have really been on the decline, and I can't help but think all of this is related. It's like we've got this real downtick at the moment where I think technologies, like you said, technology's gone from something that's felt quite utopian and hopeful and creating new possibilities into being something that feels incredibly dystopian, and more people resent having to use it. They're feeling burnt out on social media. They're feeling out of control of what's going on. They've just kind of like because we don't have much choice, right? It's like everyone is online all the time. I can't put my phone down. It feels a bit like a monkey paw thing. We made this wish to have like instant communication anywhere in the world and do all this stuff, and like the monkey paw curled, and now we're in this world where it's like we can't stop checking bloody Instagram. That was a long answer.
It's a great one though, because
Cool.
we want to like look. I love exploring not just the issue but the person, and it's like a historical record of like people's experiences and how it's built to what we're talking about and what we're fighting for today. And like just hearing about your experiences of like the way things are dying down, and even just the first thing you said about the arms trade stuff being the least popular within your studio, and also just the kind of like little hubs of activism and like hope that you saw and like experienced so clearly that like really are missing today. And it does make us wonder why. Like obviously from what I know, it's like, well, obviously because like there is this hyper normalization of the military, and we are feeding these narratives of normalization into our education, which is what we look at. And when you think about it like that, how the web is really being weaved from such a young age, like Girls Who Code, that's like they've had a partnership since 2018, and they've been literally talking to teenagers. And there's these videos of these teenagers being like, yeah, I want to use coding to make a more secure world on Raytheon's platform. And
Right.
like, how does that happen?
I don't want our cruise missiles to get hacked by the Russians. Like, okay. Yeah. So I think it's funny. Yeah. So the thing that's happened in this 10-year frame really is, and I've seen it happen in a weird way. I think 10-15 years ago, if you were a tech person in a kind of community space, or indeed a lot of spaces, you were very often a team of one, and you were kind of like hacking together, something like WordPress. Well, not even WordPress, then it would be like Drupal or a similar platform to just try and make stuff work for people. And like, I even remember going to these government conferences where this was under like the Blair government, I guess, where they had these conferences for what they called circuit riders back then, because like, no charity or no organization could afford a tech person on their own. So there were these people who were effective. They'd realized there were, this kind of handful of people that were kind of effectively doing tech support for several different charities, and they kind of needed support. And I think back then, a lot of the work I was doing was like setting up thin client computer suites, and which is where you have sort of one superpower computer, which is usually all we had, and lots of very low power ones. And and the big one would power all of them. So, in the squat I was in, we set up one of those, or we'd be like helping people start a newsletter, or again, more in this realm of hope. It was much about access. There was physical spaces where the access happened. Most of political organizing was still like organizing events rather than being mad online. And even like indie media, I look back now, a lot of the comments on there, they're such good natured, and they're kind of, they're poking fun. And the idea now that you would have a news site where the comments on it would be fun and lighthearted and people would know each other is just bonkers, right? But now you fast forward and tech's gone huge. There's tons of money poured into it. I think we all saw the government advert of like, oh, the ballerina should retrain as a coder, right? Just this direct idea that, and now it's like, if you learn to be a coder, you don't learn how to be self-sufficient and to make things yourself. You usually learn, there's a few technologies that have been developed by companies called Facebook and since open source, like React, Kubernetes, Amazon, and there's like Amazon Web Services, which is something that runs most of the websites on the internet most people have never heard of. But effectively, like, Amazon's web hosting requirements are so massive, they've created this entire ecosystem where you can rent as many computers as you want, if by the second, really. So we could open a console and spin up like 10,000 computers and scale something to 1 billion people, right? But only Amazon need to do that. Only these massive companies need to do that. But this is what people are being taught now. So you're not learning to kind of be self-sufficient and work with someone to answer a problem. Like you said, you're learning to be one of a team of 200 who makes missiles slightly more secure for Raytheon. And I think part of this is, like with everything in the arms industry, right? The way that it works internally, so that people don't, I assume, get traumatized and burn out or realize what they're doing, is you break the work down into such tiny, infinitesimally small pieces that no one really has an idea what the big picture is. And now that's kind of happened in code. So, if one person was going to do this on their own, they might start to have some ethical questions. But if you're on a team of several thousand, presumably over several locations, writing the guidance system for a helicopter, it probably seems like just quite a cute engineering challenge, right? Mm-hmm. So I think the interesting thing about this is, like, the computers have always been directly tied to the military. So, a lot of the early things it was designed for were like ballistics guidance systems. You can read, Ma Hicks has written a book called Programmed Inequality, where they talk about the kind of history in Britain of how kind of programming went from being something that was done, that was seen as basically drudge work, like machine workers, I think they were called, and it was all women, and it was like awfully paid, like the lowest level of clerical work. And then at some point someone realized that this was going to catch on, and they kind of instituted this whole new strata of like men to manage these women who didn't know what they were doing because they'd not done it. And just through this mad process, like ended up with this system, which is like, I don't know how to describe it. It's so everything about Britain in a weird way, like all this innovation and all this potential, and like all, and then just sort of like ruined by this complete top-down administrative thing about, oh, we need men to run this. But then in the book, Hicks talks about how this was in many ways like a world first, because like the computers that were built by the Allies to fight in World War II actually did something real in the world, right? They actually broke these codes. And so after the war, they tried to like professionalize this and like, use these same kind of systems, and the same happened in the States, and they were kind of exporting them all over the world as this like colonial force, just like, okay, we've now got these machines, they should be used everywhere. I think also most famously, IBM were highly involved in creating the computer systems for the Nazis to run the eradication system for the Holocaust. They were like literally the architects of it, right? In terms of like making the punch card systems, designing the databases. A lot of those codes you see come directly down to like, database systems that were designed by IBM to be able to process this quantity of people. And this was like the head of IBM at the time, Watson. Now his name is on the front of one of the, the big, there's like a big IBM processing platform called IBM Watson that's named after him. Yeah. So it's like, it's there and it's just there in a way that's not separable in any way. This is why these technologies were developed. This is how they are who they are. There's no meaningful separation between the, sort of tech for war and tech for not war in this main computing sense. That was a bit of a ramble, but I think I got there.
No, it's so interesting, because like, even, thinking about something which we always hear about, which is this question of dual use, even looking on TikTok, because Motherboard on Vice did like a really good TikTok about the girls who code and Raytheon, and it's all like, yes, queen, like, get your girl bosses into the arms trade, like, this is the way we can secure women's rights. Like, obviously just completely taking the piss. And there's loads of comments like, yeah, but do you not know that like Raytheon also create other things? And what you've just described, it's almost like a tech like monarchy, just to be on trend with like global news, you know, because the arms trade and the military is obviously one of the most profitable industries. And they started way back when, right? So they've had so much time to rise to the top. And as you said, they maintain that higher power to be able to really like manipulate and control the way we use tech today and the way it drives. And, you know, it really is. Well, how would you respond to that comment of, well, they make other things too?
I mean, so does everyone, right? It's one of those like it's just a bit of a rhetorical statement, isn't it? It's like, so what? You know what I mean? They also make the bad stuff. I think I know Campaign Against the Arms Trade have got something on this. So I think it's something like, you know, they sort of start looking at companies that any more than 20% of what they do is arms. Because again, you know, it's like with the global supply networks we've got nowadays, there's probably barely any people who don't in some way. So I remember talking to someone from CAT who was saying, for example, one thing they can do that's really effective is if they find that there's a certain component like a screw or a washer size that's being, you know, these companies will make masses of washer sizes and they might find one that's literally only being used to make tanks, and it's quite easy to ask that manufacturer to stop supplying that because it's like one part of their business.
Right.
You know, I live in Hume, which is like the birthplace of you know, Rolls-Royce. That we got the names are all over the place, and there's like a weird grill in the park, like a, you know, a Rolls-Royce front grill. But you know, they make weapons too. They're a big exporter, and I think just it's like the complete arc of this, right? So, you know, we talk about military industrial complex, but increasingly it's become like military industrial surveillance complex. So the combination of these things together is part of the security apparatus, right? Like spying on people, basically. So with the kind of internet, you know, with literally everything being online now, you know, we got these big monitoring bases like GHCQ, who are the British intelligence service, who probably just have access to all the unencrypted data that's just sent over the internet. You know, like it's really terrifying to think of it, and just the volume of it too. And you know, we know all these apps are tracking us, and then they go into kind of gigantic databases on kind of varying levels of legality where all these data sets are combined, and kind of, I think it's a bit kind of like sky's the limit in terms of what you can get on people. And this was basically what the whole Cambridge Analytica scandal was about, right? I don't think they were just getting Facebook data. They were then getting tons of other data sets and piling it all up together until you get to this point where, you know, when they're election canvassing, you can be outside someone's house and you can literally see their shopping history and what TV channels they use and what they do online. And it, like all these data sets, you know, the more you add, the more kind of fidelity you get for it. I think for me, the only slight solace I have for this is like, it's obviously you can gather all the data you want, but at some point a human's got to analyze it.
Yeah.
It's like what they're going to prioritize. But I think it's just creating this thing where there's probably like a point in the past where everything since then is like stored forever. So you probably just can't meaningfully delete an email from the world anymore, right? Unless it's been sent encrypted. So yeah. And I think with this Girls That Code thing, I guess this is really what I'm leading up to. In a way, like, this stuff's no surprise to me, and I've seen this kind of thing a lot actually. In Manchester, I remember seeing an event where like the Co-op Digital did an event with Thales, who are a French arms manufacturer. I've seen BAE Systems are a large investor in the region, and they've done stuff with all sorts of people. So, I mean, BAE Systems were even allowed to set up an academy school in Barrow, which then got shut down. But you know, it's meant to be a, you know, you can go there and do your, I'm not sure what it'd be, like a vocational qualification in building nuclear submarines, right? And
this is it. Like even when I like spoke to Vice Chancellor Nancy Rothwell at the University of Manchester, and I said like, oh, at what point does human life in other countries come before your commercial interests and research? And this video is on our YouTube. And she said, oh, well, while our government does it, why wouldn't we? And she also went on to say, well, are you not going to get the bus? Because Rolls-Royce makes the metal that is like creating our buses. And it really does, like, it's almost,
God.
I think it's really fascinating what you said earlier about it being like a bit of a microverse of Britain and like the colonial
God, I
power.
mean, just like the genius brain on her, right? Oh yeah, the concept that we could make a bus and not a tank. Like, oh, what a concept! Like,
Literally, like they're just naturally like one. Like it's only
yeah,
only as a pair.
it's like, oh, if you get a day rider, that's the same as you bombing a village, right? It's like, no, it's
Yeah.
really not.
Literally, like it was such a reach, and just a complete diversion from the fact, which is BAE is supplying Saudi Arabia, which is
Yeah.
literally dropping bombs on the worst humanitarian crisis in the world, which is Yemen, and hundreds of thousands of children are starving. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I shouldn't get on the bus because like I don't support Rolls-Royce weapons procurement. Like, no. But yeah, I think you're definitely right about this like colonial strength, and it's like the technological strength, which is now just like really manipulating the way we are able to live forth our ethics. We look at Girls Who Code, like they're obviously based on trying to make a better world, and like it's sad because I've been following them for some time, and you are like, this is so cool, like you're really helping people, and like maybe if more of our tech was being coded by women, there would be kind of more of like a woman's perspective in it, and yada yada yada. And then you just think about the power and the corruption of power and wealth, and like the £1 million donation that Raytheon has given Girls Who Code, and you think like, oh, is that it? Like, seems like a bit more though, because like I don't know, like they don't seem like they're struggling.
I mean, it's ethics washing is the new word I'm hearing for it, right? And then they can put that on their CSR portfolio and say this work they've been doing. But yeah, and I think like the broader issue here, and I guess why I mentioned Hicks's book is because, I think there's this. Okay, so the logic, so it's like this very neoliberal logic, right? It's like, why do we want girls to code? Why does it matter, right? And I guess there's a level where maybe everything should be somewhat equal, but like no one's saying like, oh, why don't we have more men cleaners, right? So you start on this level of like, why do we want girls to code? And it's like, because it's a well-paid, high social, it's a well-paid job. You can do it from home, and especially like, I'm like non-binary trans. A lot, like there's loads of trans women in this industry, and it's like one of the few ones where you can like work from home, have a high-paid job, go through your transition, not get bothered, right? So there's loads of benefits to it. But then the reason it's high paid is because like, why is any job high paid, right? It's high paid because usually, and wages feel so hyperinflated at the moment too in the sector, because there's like a, it's Thursday evening, my brain's gone. There's not enough people who want to do it, right? Or not enough people who are getting into it. So a lot of it is like, right, it's a girl boss thing, like you say, but not in a bad, not necessarily even in a bad way, just in a like, women should have more money and we should close the wage gap in those ways. But then even within these companies, no one's really asking why women are leaving. And if you look at that, it's often, like sexual harassment or bullying. It's just like the career opportunities aren't there. It's glass ceiling stuff. And if you look at a lot of the people who've been through these companies, it's like, they're like, no, there's no problem with recruitment. It's all then this leaky pipeline thing. So why are we spending so much energy focusing on recruiting people into a fundamentally toxic industry? But then even once you get past all that, the thing is with capitalism, it would love to pay people less, right? And it's been shown in like multiple studies that it's literally like as the percentage gender wise of people who do a job changes, the salary for that job changes. So like programming is only going to be a high paid job as long as it's mostly men. I think as soon as that lever swipes and it goes back to being mostly women again, like it was in the early days, it's going to, funnily enough, start to be seen as like a really boring drudge work job that you do as like an office job, like anything else, which is on some level kind of what it is. So I think it's like, there's lots of levels going on here. And yeah, right now it's a high paid job. And I think I wouldn't, I don't begrudge anyone doing it. It's like a good income. It's a good living in a way that probably every job should be. But there's like this larger capitalist piece about like, what really are the motivations here for these companies? You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, Definitely. And like, you know, it's another muddle in the communication, which like makes us question our own ethics. You know, it's this whole, oh, wait, what's that thing where it's like, oh, like, yeah, but if we weren't sending them aid or like giving them the white savior, then they wouldn't have a job. You know, it's like, no, like, we can't get lost in the tiny little good sprinkles they're giving the world, and like, oh, if they wouldn't do it, who would? And all of these kind of just excuses which make people feel comfortable enough to accept that our greatest minds are going towards weapon development rather than saving the planet.
Absolutely. And I think this is another thing I really picked up from the CAP stuff they did around the DICE, the London Arms Fair. I think like, because there's so many other angles to the arms trade that are awful, right? But the one I really hadn't considered was the impact on the environment and the climate. And I think a lot of this is because we've been encouraged to think about the climate in quite scientific terms, about, you know, sort of like degrees increase or carbon emissions, which are obviously important. But there's just this direct thing that happens where, you know, if you drop bombs on somewhere, all the chemicals from that get into the waterworks and pollute the water table. They destroy the buildings and the wildlife. They upset the ecosystems. And it's like, and that has real long-term impacts on humans too. So it's like and the carbon emissions from their creation. So on like every level, it's kind of awful. So it's kind of unreal how many levels there are. I think even I went to an exhibition at the Whitworth near me by Forensic Architecture, who did this exhibition about, I can't remember what it's called, cloud something. It's about clouds, but they were looking at clouds as like showing basically how like gases distribute. So they had some examples of actual ones, but they were showing all the stuff that I had no idea about how, like, you know, some of these weapons will be dropped by, say, by like Israeli drones, like across their side of the border when the wind's blowing into Palestinian territory. So they're effectively able to use these surrounding, you know, the weather to basically do chemical weapons attacks. And, you know, Palestinians were fighting back by sort of like setting up big piles of tires and setting them on fire when the wind was blowing the other way. But it's just like this. And then even if there's a hill, when it rains, all these chemicals are going to roll down. And it's like, again, this is all the stuff these companies are making. And it's so much stuff that's going on. And yeah, exactly like you say, it's just the sheer amount of money in this is kind of gross to think about.
For real. Do you know what? Can we just get this YouTube video, like Raytheon's last uploaded video, because I think it's just a good kind of like look into what we're talking about, and just like we can talk about we can start to kind of just explore where the issues are. Like,
dominance is critical in today's global threat environment. To stay one step ahead, Raytheon Missiles and Defense is advancing the capabilities of weapons like AMRAAM and Stormbreaker, with upgrades to AMRAAM hardware and software to enhance its range, maneuverability, and effectiveness against advanced threats. And the Stormbreaker smart weapon, network-enabled to receive target updates in flight and readily integrated across a host of platforms. Raytheon Missiles and Defense.
the thumbs up. What was that? Thumbs up. Like, oh my god, like, it's actually crazy. Like, as you say, this isn't
Top Gun cosplay, right?
Right? It's so creepy. Like, and we're not just talking about this missile will hit a, you know, threat, as they're preaching, and kill them.
Yeah.
And probably kill other people around it, probably kill a home, maybe a business. It will then leak into the waterworks, as you say. But this is just the end of the journey. Like, they mine for minerals to be able to make these weapons and to create the technology they have. This is like often involved with a lot of like labor issues and abuse. Then you have the sale, and it's not like a low carbon task to transport a missile or a fighter jet like that across the world and sell it. And then you have like, yeah, the cleanup, the use, which we just talked about, and then the cleanup, which most of the time never happens because you've just blown somewhere up. So how are you supposed to safely clean up that area? Like, it doesn't happen. So
You know what that
wow,
video reminded me of too? Marvel
what?
movies. It looks so much like a Marvel, and I'm sure that's deliberate. It's like this real, clean images, people in uniforms looking at screens. It's all very like clinical, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then, like that whole video, they didn't show it landing, funnily enough, which is weird because it's literally an advert for a missile. You think they would show what it does, right? But
For real. And it's strange as well, like, because the video is called Extending Air Dominance, right? When you think about that title in reflection of their partnership with Girls Who Codes, and we want to also, there was a really weird video, but it was from 2018, so it's maybe not appropriate to show, but like a Raytheon technologist is talking. He's like, we really need to close the gender gap within the next 7 years. And the best way to do that is to inspire women to like science. And I was like, first of all,
But again, why do they want to change close the gender gap, right? It's to save money on programmers. Positive.
Yeah, and it's first of all, it's like you're not trying to help women, you're trying to like help yourself. You can just tell by the way they're trying, like, oh, we need to do this or I'm gonna get fired. Like, that was the energy. And then they're like, thanks to us, women like science.
Yeah. And again, I mean, you look at the history of science in the Colonial Project, right? Like, there's an amazing book called Decolonizing Methodology that I read that kind of blew my mind on this, by Linda Smith. And it talks about how like research for kind of colonized peoples a dirty word. Basically, it's something that happens to you by colonizers. And there's just a bit in the book describing how kind of like, whereas in most kind of like tribal or native cultures, there's like a kind of art and science and like day-to-day life and ceremony and having fun and work are all like kind of combined, right, in some way. So there's not really like these strong distinctions as there are between here. And then a lot of what colonial forces, what these did when they were brutally colonized by the British Empire, to keep it topical, is they split all these things up. So all of a sudden, that's academic knowledge that belongs in the university, and by the way, you're at the bottom and you're excluded from that. We're calling that native art now, and that goes in the art gallery, but not with the white art. There's like a separate add-on thing at the bottom, and etc for everything else, right? And like healthcare things, all of a sudden, that's alternative medicine, so it's like this subdivision and subdivision and subdivision. So it's like this stuff goes deep, is what I'm saying. And I think this is what computers do, really. So like I said, on a base level, the computers we have now are like jumped up ballistic missile simulators, and the worlds they can imagine inside them are still based around that sort of very mathematical idea that everything's kind of completely knowable on Cartesian grids. And it's we use these things every day, but it's kind of hard to get your head around how much that impacts the way that we think about the world.
Expand on that. So you think that because our daily bread, which is our technology, has been made with like military wisdom, shall we say, how do you think that actually does affect the way we think?
Well, I don't know is the honest answer, because it's hard because we're living in it. But I'll give an example, right? So there was a time not so long ago, in fact, it's still now for some things, where if you wanted to access something, you fill in a paper form, right? And if you're handed a paper form and you fill it in and you don't like one of the questions, or you don't like one of the boxes, or you think something's wrong, you can like scribble it out or write something offensive on it, or like, you know what I mean? You can like alter it to do what you want before you hand it back, and then it's someone else's problem to deal with. With like web forms, which is basically what every website is, it's like a big combination of different forms with different endpoints and everything else. You can't do that. There's no. It sounds like I'm making a really abstract point, but it's like there's no flexibility. Things kind of just work in exactly the way the person who designed them intended, unless there's a bug. And I think a lot of people have experienced this nowadays, where like, you know, trying to do online shopping and like returning things, it doesn't quite do something you want and you can't talk to anyone, or like you want web support for a thing and you can't have it anymore. It's like, here's our knowledge base and not. And it's just this real oppressive system in a sort of very day-to-day bureaucratic way. And I think it sort of like depersonalizes. So a big example, right? So, you know, we spent quite a bit of time thinking about like the gangs database and the matrices that the police use in London. And Ruha Benjamin's got a book talking about similar things in the States, where, you know, people are being identified. Basically, the logic of these people who previously would just, you know, sort of over police minoritized groups has now been converted into algorithms, right? And now those algorithms are like being used to drive databases. So like in the, you know, some of these cases in the States, there's like unborn children who are ending up on these gangs databases because the algorithms spit them out, because presumably a combination of all the other people who are on them. So we've sort of got this little cottage industry, and like replacing racist colonial processes that used to be done by humans with like computer algorithms that do the same thing. And what this does is it makes the whole process invisible, and it just makes it like, oh, the computer program just needs a bit of a tweak. It's not like this concept of, you know, it's so, and I think this is what computers have really done. They've made so much of this previously visible, if opaque, bureaucracy completely invisible. And in fact, like almost everything we access now is behind this universal interface of like a browser window, like what we're talking on now, right? Like everything's been reduced to the same thing, and you can't see all the things behind it. It's like it's obscure by default. You know, we don't even know what country this video is being relayed through to make this stream. It's
so interesting. Yeah, and it's like as well. What was I going to say? it is like this idea that like you're putting something out for a purpose, right? And most of the time that is tech. Like the tech creates the objective which the consumers consume. And as you say, like often if it was off screen, you'd be able to say like, no, like this doesn't work for me, I'm out. Whereas now if you want that service and you don't want to like oblige by their rules, then you don't get the service. So it really, yeah, that's such a fascinating point.
Like, yeah, if you want, you know, if there's a, because when stuff's rooted in place, like if, you know, the benefits office aren't paying people or whatever, you could go have a protest there. But when it's a government computer system that's doing that, it's like, where do you even go? And when it's Facebook, where do you meaningfully go? Like it's kind of it's kind of abstracted everything to a point where it's really hard to like reason about and really hard to think about. And also I think it's like there's a weird thing too. So again, like if you access an app through your phone, I think a lot of people can feel like the technology is the app on your phone, as if it's the thing you download, and not like the entire system behind it that allows it to happen. I'll give another example too. So one of the authors that's really inspired our work at Geeks for Social Change is Ursula Franklin, who is a Canadian peace activist and nuclear. She's like a metals physicist, and I think she said she'd only do nuclear when they agreed to phase out nuclear, which was kind of interesting. She was like, "You can have me then when you say you're not going to build any more power stations." But she made this distinction between holistic and prescriptive technologies. So a holistic technology is a technology where the person creates the whole process. So I think the example she used a lot was making a pot, where like you can meaningfully go out, gather clay, get it together, put some water, oven, fire, go through the whole process. And you might make 10 pots and they might all look the same, but they'll have all gone through a slightly different process as you kind of adapt and use your skill to kind of, you know, make them all work. You could also say an individual computer on its own can be a holistic technology. So if you design a poster for a club night and print it off, it's something completely self-contained, and you've defined the input and the output and made the thing. A prescriptive technology, on the other hand, is a technology of, it's basically a technology of the boss. So it could be similar things, but it's done from the perspective of making universal units that are interchangeable. So like making a steel beam, for example, will be done to a certain specification anywhere. And then the technology becomes create like reducing the unit cost of this thing, because that, and then that's the focus. It might be a factory that then creates pots, because all of a sudden you can start to monitor how quickly they're being made and what kind of quality control and who's doing them. It can also be a network of computers where all of a sudden the boss is able to monitor people's output and see how much stuff they're doing and all the rest of it, right? Like in a call center. And I think the distinction between these two is vital, because I think this former category of holistic technology is a lot of the purpose that people see in things, and the sort of, in a way, the good stuff, like tools for creation and like knowledge transmission and people being in control of their output. And this prescriptive technology is fundamentally a technology of the boss. And that's where we start talking about who that boss is. And usually it's a global mega corporation or an arms company or a whoever else. It's not a workers cooperative or a nationalized industry or a, you know, and again, no one really wants to talk about that. Talking about ownership of tech platforms and how we might change that, or even using that as the start of a debate, right? Like, who owns this? What are their motivations? How do they use it? It feels really hard to have, because it's like, it's literally so divorced from like, you know, like using the Facebook app and then wondering what's in Mark Zuckerberg's head and what he wants from us. It's like there's a lot of steps there and a lot of links, and it's all opaque and it's all invisible and it's not documented, you know?
Yeah.
Like every time I mean, I stopped using Facebook years ago, but there was a period where I was really observing how the interface was changing overnight, right? Because these aren't even static pieces of software. They're moving targets that are constantly adding features and tweaking, and right? So I remember very distinctly when they changed enter from being new line to being post. And it was obvious that decision was, we want people to post more stuff faster and think less, because that will create more conflict and debate. And then there was a part where they started, all of a sudden there was this news feed on the side of like stories they curated, and it's like, right, they're trying to get into the news game now. And you know, now they've really obviously been pushing hard on their VR headsets and meta stuff, presumably because they really want the data set of like what people's eyes look at and their face measurements and stuff, right? And I don't even know if they know what they're going to do with that yet, but they want to have it.
So interesting. Wow. So much to digest. Like, hello everyone that's listening, that's here with us. Please, if you've got any thoughts or feelings about everything Kim's just said, or Girls Who Code and their lovely partnership with Raytheon Technologies, our favorite missile producer, please put them in the comments, because we're going to be wrapping this conversation up very soon. Yeah, I guess like let's try and get a little bit of hope in before we close this off, because when it comes to, you know, Girls Who Code and Raytheon's, you know, you see such an inspiring organization, and I think about it in terms of demilitarizing education and how we really want universities to move their investments and partnerships, because a lot of the time we're talking about research partnerships, right? Where an arms company will come to a university and say, we want one of your students to help us build this, and we'll pay for their, you know, their research and their studying or whatever it is. So we want them to instead partner with peaceful and sustainable organizations that can help us work towards peace and sustainable living. So I'm wondering if you have had any inspiration or any thoughts on this, and how military technology can be innovated for good.
I feel mixed. I feel like at the moment, especially where we are at this moment in time, it's particularly bleak, and it feels hard to imagine things getting better in our lifetime, which is kind of depressing to say, to be honest. But and I've seen some of this discourse too in kind of like some anarchist spaces I've been in recently, where it's almost, and especially in like trans organizing spaces at the moment, where stuff feels so bleak. And I know it's hard thinking about just sort of trying to make the life better for the next generation, but it does feel a little bit where we are. I think in saying that, I guess like the only hope I'm drawing at the moment, which doesn't really sound like hope, but I feel like the almost complete collapse in meaningful political representation that I think most people who probably listening to this, yourself, are feeling at the moment in the UK, in the world. There has definitely been a shift recently, I think, back to people really trying to start thinking about what grassroots means and what localism is. And I feel like there's definitely a sense around, I think, that, like I say with the monkey paw curling, right, it's like stuff's moved too quickly, too fast. It's almost like we weren't ready as a kind of species for this level of like knowledge sharing, and especially its kind of exploitation by, you know, governments and corporations. And I think some of this is just starting, really. I think I'm seeing a lot of stuff at the moment about pushing back in terms of like people trying to really limit their screen time and think about their social media use. We're also seeing through some of the community work we're doing, there's like there is like this mass exodus happening at the moment from Facebook as it becomes increasingly corporate and is trying to force people to use video content, and no one wants to use it, and Facebook events don't work anymore. And people are kind of going, I think, a bit back to like WhatsApp groups and face-to-face conversations, which is really bad for, on some levels, for like, you know, fracturing of society. But another level, I think it's kind of like maybe we're sort of entering a time where people are valuing those like one-to-one connections a bit more, and they're trying to get away from this like, I mean, how many apps do we have nowadays that we used to communicate on? I think everyone's just feeling so overwhelmed with all the fucking apps, right? Like, so I don't know. It feels like we're in a bleak phase, but I think usually it's out of those phases that like the next thing emerges, or at least I hope it does. How are you feeling about it at the moment?
Well, my cousin sent me a great quote yesterday, which was, "Not every storm comes to..." Wait, let me actually read it before I like completely misquote this cute quote. Where is it? "Not all storms come to disrupt your life. Some come to clear your path." And yeah, I guess like obviously it's definitely bleak, and it's definitely a massive thing, as we've explored so well, and you've given us such amazing insight into in this conversation. Like, it is in the DNA of today, right? The military is what I mean. And you know, even beyond the like purpose of military supposedly being like a peace building tool and our protection and our security, we don't seem to see that actually it's part of the issue. And it's like what you're saying, like we're in it, so how can we see it like that? But I'm an optimist, so, and I'm working with amazing people the whole time. Like yesterday I was on a call with a load of students and some of our community members at DED, and just like hearing all of their energy and hearing the discussions around how we will get universities to follow in the footsteps of the fossil-free movement. Because like, let's not forget, there has been successful change in that space. Obviously, we still need to see the fruits of it. Like, there's a lot of talk right now, but why wouldn't they want to innovate for a better world? So yeah, I think what's the word? Vigility? No, not vigility. Vitality? No.
Vitality?
Vitality, right? You know, being vigilant and staying focused and staying true to like what we're actually doing this for is, you know, what keeps me going, and like what, you know, makes me able to have a good time when we're you know, having a discussion like this, or like yesterday having a discussion. Next week we're having more meetups on Discord, so please come along. We're going to be actually doing group research sessions, so we all together research a university and upload it to our database, so come through. So yeah, it's all good, you know. I think like the most important thing, the baseline, is it would be worse if we weren't for this.
I think a lot of it, maybe to put it in, it's almost getting ready, isn't it? Because it feels like just the state of the country can't go on. Like we've got kind of like mass strikes. Like my friend just told me that she can't book a train ticket for 2 weeks from London to Manchester because the train company don't know if they're going to be able to force their staff to do enough overtime hours for shit pay. So they're not
Right.
opening the train reservations, right? Like, how can
It's
this
like
continue?
£200 for a train to London right now.
Yeah, like how can this continue? And we got this cost of living
2 hours.
crisis. Like everything's falling apart. There's mass strikes going on, which just seems to be growing, and it's obviously just not in the news at all. It does feel like there's something coming, and it'll probably be outside of any movements that we're in. It's going to be like a sort of, it feels like the whole sort of neoliberal democracy is falling apart. I even spoke to someone the other day. I won't say who, but it was a large funder, and they realized recently that their entire funding model was based on the idea that if we analyze a problem really carefully, write a really good report on the problem and a good analysis, and show a way it can be solved in a cost-effective way, and we put it in front of the right policymaker, change will happen. And they've just gone, that's not true. But like what? Like I just feel like that can't continue as a world. So I don't know. I'm trying to get ready and get organized and trying to learn better ways of relating and being compassionate, because I think stuff's gonna get weird. I think.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. Like there's going to be a lot of uprooting and a lot of like chaos that comes with it, but you know, bring it on. All right, well, let's wrap this up. I want to ask you the question we ask every Dead Talks guest, which is, why demilitarize education?
It's where it all starts, right? The indoctrination starts really young, and I think I hear it's the same in finance, but it's definitely the same in coding, where like if you go and do a course now, the course will be based around the needs of these gigantic companies. Like, you can look at MMU's apprenticeship page for like code people, and I think it literally says you'll be alongside Thales and BAE staff, right? It's something they advertise. And I think it goes so deep into this pedagogy I'm talking about, where it's like, yeah, the skills you need to do that, to be on a team of 200, to do these security analyses or whatever. So I think that's why it all starts here. I think the brainworms start young, and it's important to kind of just get there and root them out at this sort of real pedagogical level.
Amazing. Yes. Don't get trapped by the golden handcuff, as an amazing DJ said the other day while we were on Reform Radio.
Nice.
Well, Kim, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Just so insightful. We need to do this again because, also, can you comment that book, the Ursula, that Canadian woman, because they all sound absolutely fascinating. To everyone that's listening, thank you so much for tuning in with us. We're going to be here next week talking to Forces Watch. And yeah, we're just pleasure to be here with you. We're on this peacemaking journey together. So holla, join our Discord server, get involved. And remember, we ain't dead yet. Bye.